Welcome, everybody, to 52 Living Ideas and Greater Philadelphia Thinking Society. This is a Comprehensivist Wednesday. And today, I'm honored to have my friend Mike back, and he's talking to Alison. And it's going to be about what makes a teacher or a learning experience stand out. Over to you, Mike.
Thank you, Shrikant. Welcome, everybody. I really appreciate you coming out tonight. The meetup, if it runs the way I would like it to, should come in 3 or maybe 4 parts. The first 25 to 30 minutes, I'm going to have sort of a podcast conversation with Alison. We're just going to talk about the topic to kind of begin to unpack things. The second part is where I'm going to kind of give you the mic to talk about a teacher or a learning experience in your life. And depending on how many people agree to share, I'll allot a certain amount of time. Maybe it'll be 4 minutes each or 5 minutes each. And when you're done with all of that, the third part is I would like you to come back on with an observation about something you pulled away from those presentations. So I highly recommend that you take 30 seconds and get a piece of paper and a pen. And as Alison and I are chatting, if there's something that comes to mind, please write it down. And then as you're giving your presentation about a teacher or experience that really turned you on, and it can be from any age. I try to make it clear in the promo that you could be talking about a grade school teacher, middle school teacher, all the way up. Everybody here at 52 Living Ideas, we're still lifelong learners. So all of us are learning even today, which means you might have your own teacher now that's hitting the mark for you. I also realize that there are a lot of self-learners or autodidacts, which means maybe you have your own way to learn something that's really working. Feel free to present it when it's your turn to talk. But again, if everybody takes enough notes, I'm hoping that at the end of this, we can start connecting some dots. For example, I'm looking at a couple of faces. I see Mona in one corner. Maybe Mona is going to say something about a teacher that Mona had that had the same characteristics of one of the ones that I had or Alison had. And then we're going to see, wait a minute, those two teachers connected. What is it about that attribute that turned these students into learners? That's all I'm hoping to do. If we have time, and I have by the number of people here, I'm really hoping I can leave enough time where we turn the recording off and we do a little bit of improvisation at the end. I have a couple of friends that I improvise with that are here tonight. And if there is enough time, we can wrap up the evening with that. That all being said, I'm just going to start talking to Alison. So Alison, thank you very much for agreeing to talk to me.
Oh, sure.
And for agreeing to turn your hat around and from being a teacher, which I know you are. How many years are you in the classroom now?
20 years.
20 years. Okay. Yeah.
And before that, I taught school for 20 years, and then I taught dance for 14 years before that. So
okay. Yeah, that might be a good place to start because you were a dancer.
Yeah.
And was there anybody in the dance field that really kind of really got you dancing?
There were so many. It's I mean, I've had really phenomenal teachers, but the one that stuck out was a teacher that I had when I was growing up in California. And he was also a choreographer. So he had grown up in Orange County like I did, had moved to Europe and was a choreographer in Germany for a long time. And then he retired and moved back to California and then opened a studio. And I feel like, I had all these great teachers for teaching the steps, but what was amazing about him was that he was constantly, most of his references went over my head, but he was constantly talking about opera and poetry and literature and history. And somehow, it really made me realize that dance wasn't just about the movement, that it was about so much more than just that. And it really affected me because I feel like later on when I moved east and I studied with a lot of really important dance companies and learned probably most of the major important dances that have been created in the last century. And it just helped me because I could realize, I could see that each movement wasn't just a dance. It was, each gesture had meaning, and then I could look for it. And I feel like also in some ways that kind of connects to what we're doing here, because, it made me want to keep learning and growing. And I think it also, like, I was always kind of tied between wanting to dance and wanting a more intellectual life. And I feel like he really kind of made me realize that I could have both. It wasn't a choice. It was that they were very interwoven.
Yeah, that's a great point. From teaching chess all these years, it's 32 years teaching chess. I had a chess teacher who, if there are any chess players here, I think everybody probably have heard the name Bobby Fischer. Won the world championship in 1972. But what a lot of people don't know is he had a player, his name was Bill Lombardi. Bill Lombardi actually became a priest at one point, left the priesthood, had a child, was a confidant of Bobby Fischer's. And when Fischer won the world championship, he kind of, he was slighted, Lombardi, because Fischer was a bit of an eccentric to begin with, right? And I'm going to connect this to what you just said about your dance teacher. Lombardi felt slighted. So he did two things for me as a teacher that I'll never forget. One, he was a walking encyclopedia of what happened during the Bobby Fischer era. He grew up with Fischer, and there was a while, they were similar age, and there was a time when his playing was slightly better. So he knew everything that surrounded Fischer in that time. So, and I started playing chess fairly late in life, but I became obsessed with it. I really wanted to learn how to play. So I ended up taking private lessons with him. So similar to the way your dance teacher wrapped all these other subjects around dance, Lombardi did it for me with chess. We actually analyzed chess positions on the same exact board that he used with Fischer. So I felt like it was this complete immersion into not only the time period, but with the guy that was actually making that history. And then he'd talk about the history of an opening, like chess players have set openings that begin, and a lot of them have names like the London system or the Dutch, or they're usually attached to players or places. You may have a famous grandmaster that plays this opening in a city somewhere, wins the tournament, and then gets the name of that city attached to the opening that he or she played. Lombardi knew all of this stuff. So again, when I was learning chess, I was also at the same time being immersed with the history and everything that ran around that. The other thing that really stood out, and now this is kind of it's a strange comment to make, but I was the beneficiary of him feeling slighted. Why do I say that? Because he did not want to teach kids chess. He felt not that he was that was beneath him. He was a world-class grandmaster, and he wanted to really coach other strong players. The problem was there wasn't enough of them. There were, however, lots of kids who were playing chess. So he felt slighted twice. One, where the world's most famous chess player put him in the shadow. And number two, players like me who became teachers. I couldn't hold I know very little compared to him, but I could teach. So because he didn't have students, he became a little bitter. And his teaching tool, and this is something that I found in other teachers, and I'm hoping there are other people here tonight that have found the same. He was very sarcastic. And once I knew that he only wanted to get me better at chess, which he did, he let the sarcasm fly. In chess, you have two bishops, one that controls dark squares, one that controls light squares. And you have to be careful if you trade one off prematurely, because you're left without control over certain squares. So he would look at me and goes, oh yeah, you're the one that invented the game where you could start with three bishops, and he'd hold the bishop that I traded because we were analyzing one of our games, and he'd hold it up and goes, yeah, we're talking about one of these things. Oh, I forgot. How do these move? You see how sarcastic I'm being? I soaked it up like a sponge because he cut right through. So if you don't mind, I'd like to maybe talk about another teacher in your life that had a bit of a quirk or a bit of a style that, you know, maybe it was sarcasm. Can you think of anybody out there?
Uh, yeah, well, it's interesting. There's two things I want to say about that.
Yeah, sure.
I used to, there used to be a music teacher at my school, and he was like what you're describing. He went straight from being in college to teaching music, and he was angry and bitter about it and took it out on all the kids. And I finally one day I just pulled him aside and I said, look, I'm not saying you're a bad music teacher. I'm just saying it's not the right time yet. And he's like, what are you talking about? And I said, you need to go to New York or LA. You need to live in the basement apartment.
There you go.
Ramen. You need to suffer and go be the starving artist. And then eventually when you're done, you can come back and do this and have health insurance and all the rest.
Yeah.
And at that point, you'll be happy to pass what you've learned on to these kids. It's like, but right now you're making them pay for something that's a mistake. And
You see, I'm trying to avoid you. You're being a good teacher now because you probably taught him a really valuable lesson.
I hope so.
Yeah.
But as for the teacher that I had, he was sarcastic. So when I was a trainee with the Martha Graham Dance Company, and when I was there, Martha was in her 90s and she didn't teach. She worked with the company a lot, but she didn't come in and teach the regular classes that much, for us youngins. But she came in, she'd pop in every now and then, and you would never know when she showed up. So she comes in, and the first time I got used to her, but the first time I had her, we're terrified, absolutely terrified, because we had no warning. All of a sudden we walk in there, look up, and like, who's sitting there? Oh my God, it's and we're so scared. None of us, we were used to all dancing together as a unit.
Yeah.
And we were good. We were really good, but we were good that day. We were terrified. And so we were not dancing our best at all. And she just looked at us and she stopped us and she said, I don't come here very often. And when I do, I don't expect to be bored. And
now, did that work for you?
Yeah, it did.
It did. How so?
Well, then I just put everything into it because I was like, well, didn't like it before. So, because we were playing it safe because we were scared. So then, but it became a line that I used for years, like in my life,
Right.
Yeah.
And that's a good point, because I think something else that makes a teacher stand out for me is they have a very good BS meter. So the first thing they have to do, it sounds like what your music teacher didn't do, the first person, is you have to understand the student's level. But I have found that the really good teachers over the years know your level, and they also know that you need to stretch, which is something we talk about so much at this particular meetup. This is your current, I hope everybody can see my index finger. If that's your level, you don't want to play 4 feet above that finger. That's way too high. And you certainly don't want to stagnate and stay here or dip lower. You always want to have that very natural stretch. A good teacher knows what you're capable of and understands how to create that gap from where you are and to where you want to stretch to. And they have to know your tendency to BS the process. They know when you're dogging it. They know how much direct, I do a lot of improv now, a ton of improv, and I'm getting to the point where they're doing what's called side coaching. So in the middle of an improv practice, the good teacher just stops you and they'll say, no, Mike, you're denying what your scene partner just gave you. That's only because they understand my current level. If they would have done that to me a year and a half ago, I would have clammed up. Do you know what I mean? So I've always found that a really good teacher has the ability, number one, to know your level, number two, how much to create the gap for you to stretch, and number three, what your BS meter is. Because if you trust them, they should be able to call you out. That's if you're in a field or discipline that you want to get better. Some of us as adult learners, we want to go at our own pace. That's fine. But if you want to improve at something, that's a different conversation.
Right.
That type of teacher, I think, needs to know those three things: your level, the amount of stretch, and then what the proper BS meter should be.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You know?
I had in high school, I was always like this really quiet kid. I always sat in the back row, and I always brought a book, and I would just read my book instead of, and got good grades, but just was pretty introverted. And then I signed up for this AP US history class, and it was team taught by these two teachers, Mr. Howenstein and Ms. Ramsberg. And I don't know what they did. Like, they just did some sort of magic. I remember one time he literally was like, get up. I'm like, what? He goes, you need to stand up. I'm like, what? He goes, come here. I said, and he made me walk down to the front row. I'm like, why? And he says, because this is where you belong.
Wow. Wow.
And he goes, you've been hiding in the back row your whole life? I'm like, well, yeah. He's like, not anymore. I'm like,
Oh, great. Great.
And suddenly I went from this person who wasn't really saying much to like the hand was up.
There you
And
go.
and I was a real big contributor, which I'd never really done before. And then he also, one of the two of them, I'm not sure which, all of a sudden they were having some like leadership conference on the weekend, and they nominated me for, I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm the one to sit in the back reading the book. But and I went to them and I said, well, why me? And he said, well, why not you? And I'm like, but I'm not really that natural leader kind of person. And he's like, those are people make the best leaders.
There you go. That's sort of like the BS meter. It's not quite the same thing, but he's looking at you and he sees some potential and he's rolling the dice. How many years ago was that?
That was I think junior year of high school. So
okay.
Yeah.
So you're 26 now. So that was
26. So
yeah. That was only like 9 years ago, right?
Yes.
Yeah. That's good. I love that. I love to hear stories. I'm sure we're going to hear some more later from the audience. I want to talk about the word irreverence, because that's one of the qualities that I absolutely love in a teacher. I had studied Taekwondo. I've told a lot of the people here that know me, I studied Taekwondo for a while. And the guy who trained me, his name was Master Na, and he did two things. He did a lot of things well, but there's two that I want to talk about tonight that made him stand out. One, he was irreverent. So Taekwondo is a Korean art. And before you come onto the mat, you bow, and depending on what the jang you're in, we have certain things that we say to each other. As your belt increases, you definitely greet a black belt differently than you would greet, say, a yellow belt. And what he would do with me occasionally is we would play chess together on the mat. We would play chess together, which was totally irreverent, because when the Grandmaster Kim came by, he would freak out. It's like what? You're on the mat and you're playing chess. That was a big no-no. But Master Na loved it because we would swap. Obviously, he was training me in Taekwondo, but we would play chess together, and he was pretty good, and I would help him out a little bit with his English. So that was really, really good. And the other thing that he did was, I'm drawing a blank here for a second. I call it alternation. And I learned from him, and I use this myself as a teacher with kids. I'm teaching, say, the average 11-year-old in a class. What do I mean by alternation? If you think of a physical sport, like a boxer, hopefully everybody can see my hands. So I'm in a fighting stance. And I think everybody has heard the word a jab. If I'm throwing a jab out, I'm not trying to hurt you with the jab. I'm more or less feeling you out. And even when I make contact with your body, I can almost tell where your weight is, etc. And then if I keep jabbing high, then I might strike low. So that's a sense of alternation. What Master Na used to do to me is he would alternate his personality with me. So one day we would sit on the mat and we're playing chess. And he's like a little kid. He's like, if you see Grandmaster Kim, we got to pack this up. He's being irreverent. The very next day, if I came to train like this, no emotion on his face at all. Michael, sir, get on the mat. And boom, he'd start hammering away and really push me. Day later, maybe 2 days later, 2 sessions later, you want to play chess? And I was like, what are you doing? Why are you doing this to me? And then I realized it's a skillful art.
Yeah.
He was taking me to the point where when I walked into the dojang, I was completely focused because I didn't know what was coming. Like, who is this guy? Totally focused every time I saw him. I kept trying to read him. Sometimes I was right, sometimes I was wrong. But what ended up happening, Alison, I was always totally focused. So what I learned from that, and which helped me as a teacher in front of the classroom, so I even do some improv in a chess class. So I'll be very funny and I'll use a lot of physicality. And I've got the kids' attention. Then all of a sudden I'll just stop and I'll point to a square. You can see a chessboard behind me. And I might just point at a square and tap it with my finger, trying to highlight that square. And I'm being very dramatic now because I'm quiet, because 30 seconds ago, I was amped up and I was moving a lot of physicality. And now I'm silent, tapping a square. And what happens is the kids are following you and they're waiting for the next time that you're going to flip. And what I found over the years is, just as I was able to kind of focus my attention on Master Na, it helped me managing a classroom. So he was an amazing teacher.
I do that the same thing. Like all the dancing I use as a teacher, because I'm constantly like around the room and very animated. I mean, it's kind of funny because I feel like it's like I'm on stage. It's different from real life. And then I come off and I'm like zonked, can't speak for a while.
Right.
But what's interesting is when you're saying like when a good teacher knows like what buttons to push on you. I had this one ballet teacher and it was funny. She was, trying to get me to do something better. And she said, oh, that's my mistake. I said, what? She said, I was explaining it physically. And she says, that doesn't work on you. I'm like,
wow.
What? It doesn't? She says,
Wow.
no, you're a visual learner. You need an image. And so then she explained it again, like, pretend I forget what it was, but it was like some whole like visual image that I had to pretend I was like some character and whatever. And then I got it. And it was funny because after that, I started paying attention and I realized that I really did respond better to some sort of a story for each little thing.
Yeah, that's very interesting. That's funny, even all the years that you teach or do improv, and I know there's a lot of people here that might be performers or actors. I think most people would agree that there's still always a little bit of stage fright or a little bit of, the butterflies. You want them to be butterflies, not dragons, there. And usually with enough practice, you can kind of tame them. But I think for me anyway, this is again, I had teachers that use their sense of humor that I really learned from. And I had one guy, I wrote his name down, it's Mr. Liuzzo, and Miss Jank. I don't want to say her name, and I'll tell you why. I'm going to keep that one. I'm going to call her Miss Jones, and you'll find out why I'm doing that. But Mr. Liuzzo, I haven't seen him in ages, was teaching English at Salesian High School in 9th grade. And the very first day, he cracked a couple of irreverent jokes. I'm all in because I was nervous. I'm a 9th grade student. I'm all in. The second that you get me to smile, if you crack a little bit of a joke, or, he said something a little off color. This was a Catholic high school. And for me, I'm sitting in every new teacher that I get, I'm sitting there going, please, just give me that little tidbit of humor, and I'm all ears. The other person, her name was not Miss Jones, was my art teacher from grade school. Talk about irreverent. She was probably in her 20s at the time, but she seemed like a real older person when I was in 4th grade. She came in one day with a shirt that had a couple of nudes on it. And all the boys, that was her thing. She'd wear funny shirts. This was like, I don't know, 1971, in that time period. So, at a Catholic school again. So, there was decorum. You had a certain way of doing things. Miss Django, she was the art teacher. She dressed She didn't dress like a nun, that was for sure. And she came in with this printed shirt on one day, and all the boys in the room are following her around. I don't know, it's Picasso's Two Nudes. And she screamed, she goes, "Are you looking at my Picasso?" Now I'm saying this like almost 50 years later, because you just recalled the story of your favorite teacher. I saw Miss Jones about 10 years ago at a school reunion. And we told that story because I wasn't the only one that remembered it. She was offended and embarrassed by it. So that's why I didn't use her real name here. But I wanted to just tell her, you have no idea what an influence you had on the kids, because yeah, she was teaching art, but she had everybody's attention because she had flair. You know, she had that little bit of irreverence or zaniness that I think you should sprinkle into your repertoire. You know, how about you? How do you take to humor from a teacher?
Oh, I think it's great. And I think, like, it's funny. I had this 6th grade teacher. I don't remember a single thing that he taught. I must have, I don't remember anything he taught. But in the summer, he was a truck driver. And he was always telling us truck driving stories. And he would we would always try to get him off topic and they were my favorite thing in the world. And he'd just talk about the beauty of America and driving the big rig and just all these stories. And it's funny because I think it really inspired a love of travel in me. I mean, I wanted to see these places.
Sure.
And so I've become a really big traveler, and I use all of my travel stories in my teaching all the time. And the kids just love it. And they always say at the end of the year, like, they like the stories. And I feel like, it's really dry if you're just kind of basically teaching from the book. You've got to bring in all the other things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, exactly. I could never, fortunately in the college career, I never was in one of the large auditorium or conference tables, lecture halls, where you have 150 or 200 people, unless the teacher is really, really good. But if you put up too many slides for me, and I have a hard time looking at a slide and listening to somebody talk at the same time. It's just the way my attention works. So it's very hard for me to learn that way. But this particular venue, so I just want to flash forward and then we can wrap up in a couple of minutes to it's 2023, right? And obviously I came here in May. I think I'm here over 2 years now already. And this particular format, so I mean, I can credit Shrikant as a teacher because he put all of this together, but this particular medium had a huge influence on the way I learn now. So, and that's why I included that in the title. I just didn't want to talk about teachers. This is more of an experience, a learning experience, to be able to get, 10, 15, 20, 30 people together that, to have access to this type of conversation. What I can't do anymore, and this is odd because I'm going to connect that with the podcast. I'm sure there's a lot of people here tonight that are also fans of a podcast. Now, there's so many out there. There's just every day there's more and more. But what's happened to me, the podcast, I'm learning so much because I'm starting to gauge what I will call an articulate, honest speaker. Because if you watch somebody, it's long form, right? It's not a produced, segmented, edited podcast. I won't watch them. I want to watch two people talk for an extended period of time, because it does a couple of things. One, it stretches me. It forces me to give the attention. But number two, if you do enough of it, and this is my experience contribution, I'm a huge fan of this media, because the more you do it, then when you see somebody who's kind of overproduced and they're very careful about what they're saying to each other, I find myself not interested. And because I want to accentuate the positive tonight, I'm going to include Shrikant, his method here, as being a learning experience that really hits the mark for me, because I'm starting to learn to appreciate how well people articulate their ideas, And how do you feel about this? You can be negative because Shrikant's listening. So if you want to.
No, I feel like it's this whole thing's been an amazing experience. And I mean, I remember like when I first started, it was with Dante. And I'm listening to everybody, and I just was like, I don't know if I belong here. These
Yeah,
people
yeah, I had the
so
same thing.
smart about
Yes, yes,
everything, and they know, and they're going back and forth, Plato and this and that, and this period and that period. And I'm like,
yeah,
but it's funny because the more I do it, then the more I start to, I still don't have the depth of knowledge about every subject that they all have, but
right, right.
at least I know a little bit about a lot of things at this point.
Well, that's an excellent point, because and now I will blow a little smoke in Shrikant's direction, because we did, when he started the Tao Te Ching meetups here, he and I, the first meetup I did was with Shrikant. We did an improvised meetup about the book The Art of Learning by Josh Waitzkin. Out of the blue, we just came up with this. And what he said there is, he goes, I don't know the book as well as you do. And I did. I happen to know a lot about the book. But then he said to the entire audience, we're going to be talking about the Tao Te Ching, because I know nothing about this, but I want to learn. So then I sat back, and my first reaction was, here's the guy that started all this. And we all know he's got an incredible depth of knowledge. He just puts his hands up like this. He goes, I don't know anything about this book. And I said, that's the kind of teacher that makes you say, okay, man, you don't need to be in a certain place. You just need to be in the game and be interested. So that's something that I pulled away from Shrikant is to the top left of me that I see. And I've also had my first conversation, long form, with Joe Bullock, who is also here. Joe, is it 2 hours and 45 minutes or 3 hours and 45 minutes? We still haven't confirmed it.
3 hours and 45.
Yeah, we just went back and forth. Alison, any closing remarks before we hear from our friends tonight?
Yeah, I think the best teachers that I had, they didn't just teach me about the subject, they taught me about life. Really.
Yeah.
And so the teacher that I mentioned at the beginning, the dance teacher who was always connecting it to poetry and art and everything else. One of my favorite quotes that he said, I'll never forget this one. I was in a balance, and I fell out of the balance, and he screamed at me. He's like, stop. I'm like, really? And he said, a balance is like life. He said, you don't get to start over. And he said, if you find yourself off balance, you have to fight to get back on balance. And he says, it's just like that. You encounter some struggle in life. You can't just start over as a baby and I'm going to live a new life and now it's going to be perfect. You've got to just fight to rewrite yourself. And that's a quote that it's always stuck in my head. I say it to every class I teach every year.
Yeah.
It's just really, really accurate, because sometimes you're just off balance. You've got to, fix it, and no one can do it for you. And
yeah, absolutely.
Like all the best teachers I had, when I really think about different things they said, they just kind of helped me with life and living and how to be a person.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. And I always thought too, and we'll wrap it up, is the good ones, or the good process should make you want to do whatever it is that they're teaching you as soon as they leave or you leave. For example, as a drummer, my first drum teacher was my sister's best friend. So again, this was 1971, very few female drummers. So she taught me how to play, and she ended up teaching the guy who taught me the most, and he just blew. We knew he was going to be a pro. And this guy, when he was done with me, he taught for 60 minutes on the dot. It was $15 an hour back then, which was a fortune. And it used to piss me off because I was so engaged. But after 60 minutes, he was gone. And I think he did it on purpose, because he said, you better pay attention, because after 60 minutes, I'm going. But Alison, I couldn't wait for him to come. I remember what his hair smelled like. And the minute he went, I was already working on my homework next week. And that's the sign of a real good teacher, because he's gone and I can't wait to get going again. You know what I mean? So,
but it's funny is those history teachers I had back in high school. I later wound up getting a degree in history. Really.
Wow. Look at that. Look at that.
Yeah. And even though I was a dancer, I was dancing, but got the history degree.
That's great.
At the same time, which most dancers don't even go to college. So.
Yeah.
But it really was probably thanks to those two teachers.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, Allison, thank you so much. I really appreciate you spending some time with us tonight. That was a great conversation. Shrikant, if you have some general remarks, then I'm going to ask people to how much time you think we can allot them to give us their contributions.
Sure, I have many remarks on, on this, because it's been a long time since I've thought about teaching. And I'm quite stunned about how I'm thinking about this, but I would like to hear everybody else first. And then I'll incorporate my comments into the mix, if it's okay with you.
That's perfectly fine. So what we can do, folks, is if you could type exclamation into the chat, and then we're not going to comment on your contribution at all. So, and depending on how many people want to chat with us, I'll put a timer on. I might just remind you that you're at, say, 4 minutes or 3 minutes. We'll get a feel for it. So right now I see Mona and Don, and I'm hoping that we have, there's Alicia, and we'll get some more people in the queue. And essentially, you just mimic what you heard from Allison and myself about a teaching experience, learning experience, or favorite teacher. How's that sound, Shrikant? Okay?
Sounds great. So folks, we're talking about 3 things: teaching experience, learning experience, or favorite teacher. You can talk about multiple of these things. Try to be concise. There's just so many people, all of us have tremendous experience with it. We want to hear as many people as possible. We're going to start with Mona, Dawn, Alicia, Mike, Javier, and Peter. Mona, go ahead.
Thank
Sorry,
you.
sorry, Mike, you wanted to add
Shrikant,
something.
I was going to say, do you want to monitor the conversation?
Yeah, I'll do that.
Perfect. Great.
All right.
Great.
Folks, go ahead.
Yes, thank you for having me. I am a teacher, but I'm also
Folks, give me just a second. Joe,
Oh.
can you stop the spotlighting on these 2 folks? I know they won't mind.
Sure. 1 second.
All right, it's going to be Allison all the time now. You need to remove okay, go ahead. Mona, go ahead, start.
So I was saying that I am a teacher, but I also feel very humbled listening to all these stories. Like all of a sudden I'm thinking, oh my gosh, what am I doing? But I wanted to say that I feel like the most important thing about the teacher is to be authentic, like to be who they are. And that's what I've got from your discussion here, because the teachers that seem to have the most impact were the ones who were actually present and they were being themselves. They were integrating their whole experience. I find myself that I'm more of a storyteller who happens to be a teacher, and that's my style and that's what I do. And as a storyteller, I've kind of progressed from being an explainer where I just basically convey information to being more of an elucidator where I try to make it interesting. And my aim is to be sort of transcending that into kind of an enchanter of sorts, because I feel like people learn best when they forget about themselves and then they just see that you enjoy it. Like there's just this joy that comes out of this learning experience. And then they want some of that. They probably don't know what that joy is, but they want some of that. And then they're ready to go learn on themselves, like by themselves or on their own, once they get that spark sort of ignited. So that's my my sort of view. And I have experience with this sort of encounter where a teacher kind of sparked something in me, or maybe vice versa. I count myself lucky if I was able to do the same for my students.
Thank you. Next up, we're just going to listen to everybody, okay? Because it's just so amazing to get all these views. And then we can do discussions, etc. later on. Don't respond to each other. Just speak your mind. Next up is going to be Dawn, followed by Alicia. Dawn.
You're still muted, Don.
Dawn, there is some problem with your mic. The mic is not working. So if you could work on your mic, and whenever you're ready, go ahead and type exclamation mark, and we'll go. I'll come to you. Next up is Alicia.
Just needed to know that I didn't know that my
Oh,
mic.
there you are. There you are.
Ah.
Go ahead.
I knew what the issue was. Thanks. Sorry about that. Yeah, first time doing this. So hi everyone. Now that you can hear me, I teach middle school computer science, and when I think back to as a kid, I didn't necessarily want to become a teacher. I didn't not want to become a teacher, but I can connect where I am now to a few teachers along the way. And I think I would start with a teacher I had beginning in middle school. Her name was Miss Ellersick. And I was always into computers. And I was always kind of just wanting to kind of get into a machine and figure out how it works and mess around with it. And I remember we were in like this accelerated course, and we got to play with this thing called Logo, the turtle, and you could make the turtle make a square and a triangle, and I was obsessed with getting the turtle to leave the boundary and wrap back around and create giant circles and like spirographs. And for most teachers probably were looking at that and thinking, oh, this kid's crazy, messing around, typing crazy stuff into their computer. But I thinking back to it, I don't have a lot of direct knowledge of conversations that we had. All I remember is I was encouraged. I was encouraged to go ahead and do that. I was encouraged to kind of be my eccentric self. And I felt that that this teacher was giving me an opportunity to celebrate something that in many other situations in the middle school didn't really get me anywhere, such as, wanting to talk about something off topic or, go into some crazy direction. And I think the second that you have a teacher who kind of gets you and appreciates you, and that happened to me again in high school, when I teach nowadays, I find myself echoing that, trying to pay that forward in a lot of ways. And I have those kids who are sitting there and they're not, I know that they're not listening to me because they're pressing buttons into the computer and they're trying to break it. And they don't even realize that they think that they're getting away with it. But no, I know that they're doing it, but I'm letting them do it because that is what they need to do to be into it. And the whole talk about sarcasm, it's like it's hard in middle school, especially early middle school. Teachers were told, oh, don't be sarcastic. The kids do love sarcasm. And I think the key is to get to that comfort level. And once you're at that comfort level, that when you can be sarcastic with someone, that means, gosh, that was just an Oppenheimer, I think. Someone was saying, they're saying that it's a similar quote to that you can, once you can joke around with someone, that means that there's a relationship there. And so yeah, I think a lot of that stuff that I remember from people who were really doing an amazing job and me not really noticing at the time, now I'm on the other side of that. I get to consciously be like, and not even when the kids don't even know, just consciously be like, I'm providing that. So that pay it forward aspect, something that I really enjoy about what I do.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Don. Fantastic. Folks, this is going to be an amazing, amazing night. Next up is going to be Alicia, followed by Mike F. Alicia.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for the conversation. I came from, or I grew up in a family, very large extended family of educators. So I think back to two teachers that I really resonated with, and both of them were fascinating readers aloud. Like, to me, they could just bring a story to life with the inflection and the way that they kind of drew you in. And I always thought that was such an interesting skill that made listening to a story so much more interesting. But the two I was thinking about, I had an English teacher my freshman year in high school. Her name was Miss Sims. She came to class dressed to the nines every day with a beautiful feminine dress. She never wore slacks. She always wore a dress with a gorgeous belt. And she was just very stylish. And similar to Alison's experience, she taught so much more than just English. So while we learned a lot in her class based on the curriculum that we were following, she also taught us a lot of things like social graces. Like we learned what a formal table looks like and what type of silverware you use. And she used to sit at a stool in the front of class when she was reading or teaching class. And if a boy in the class would walk in front of her, she would throw her leg up and like stop them like a little barrier there. And so she always taught them to walk behind the lady and to do different things. So I think she really tried to teach a lot of social graces and teach people how to behave in public as well as in English. And the other teacher that was really impactful in my life, although I never had her other than as a substitute, I never had her as my regular teacher in high school, was my mom. And my mom taught English in high school also. And she started the gifted program for the entire state of West Virginia. So she taught English, and then she had gifted students, and then she helped launch the gifted program for the state of West Virginia, where I grew up. So she was very impactful in not just that, but she too taught her kids so much more. You know, she made the curriculum interesting through the way that she taught, but she taught them lots of things about architecture, and she took them on field trips to historic homes and other big cities in the state or around. And she really opened their eyes to so much more than just what was being taught and what they were discussing in class. And, you know, I grew up in a tiny little town, no stoplight, no McDonald's, no ATM. And she got students into Harvard and Yale and all kinds of places, which was just kind of unheard of at that time. So she was incredibly dedicated. And when she passed, so many of her students, you know, reached out, drove across states to come to her funeral, sent messages, wrote poems, did all kinds of things in terms of how she impacted their lives above and beyond just English class. And she even helped some of her students through kind of life things like dealing with very difficult situations and conversations with their families or other people or whatever. So she was always there for them in that way too, and just really made it an incredible process and also a very supportive, encouraging environment.
Wow, you're lucky to have a mom like that.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Next up is going to be Mike F, followed by Peter. Mike F.
Hello, everyone. It's my first time with the group, and it's good meeting everyone. So in preparation for this evening, I've been thinking about some of the characteristics of some of the teachers who I really liked or who were particularly effective. And of course, I came up with some characteristics like the humor and other ways to get your attention. But I wanted to focus on two particular professors I had in college who I wouldn't necessarily say use those type of techniques as much as one was more charismatic than the other. But basically, the first one was my freshman year of college, was the first level calculus. I was an engineering curriculum. And the second one was an upper class class that had to do with the all the mathematics behind radio signals, all analyzing from heavy math point of view of how electromagnetic radiation propagates through space and so forth. So it's a pretty heavy class. And both of them I found, well, the upper one definitely more difficult, but the calculus, I'd never had calculus before in high school. So the thing I'll mention about the first professor for the calculus was that he was a particularly charismatic gentleman, but he wasn't in the math department. He was from the School of Public Policy. So it's kind of an outside subject for him. And I don't know if that's what made him so effective, but just maybe seeing it from somebody else's eyes. But the other professor too, he was more dry, I would say. I came into the class knowing that he had won a teaching award for being a really good professor. But in both cases, I'm thinking what the commonality was. And for me, and of course, how effective a teacher is, besides some of the basic traits that we mentioned might be different for a class in the arts versus, engineering, right? But for these two particular subjects and these two particular professors, I found that I learned best when there was a context given. So a lot of times you come into a new class and they get right in the dirt and wouldn't really explain, what the subject was used for. But these both professors, especially the upper one, with the transmission signals, he really gave a good idea for the context for how this fits into everything, and really took everything step by step in a very easy to understand way. They're really good at breaking it down into the smaller pieces, and it just made it very, or I shouldn't say very easy, but easier to digest. Both classes I got A's in, especially the upper one, not the class I'd expected to get an A in. So it just really was a really good experience from that point of view. We're very good at breaking down the pieces and getting the message across. So those two in particular. There's other ones that I can remember that I had some good experiences. Well, there were more. The other ones I'm thinking of that I won't mention are more like the ones you're describing, where they're would tell a lot of life stories, or make jokes and stuff, and that would also kind of really be good at engaging the students. So
Wonderful. Thank you, Mike. Great observations. Next up is going to be Peter, followed by Joe. Peter.
Yeah, so I want to actually start this by kind of give a brief rundown about my own change in different cultures, right? So originally I was actually born in mainland China, so pedagogy over there was very different and still different than today. Some of these things might scare Westerners because it's not the norm, and sometimes it's even illegal. And I'm talking about physical punishment. So that's definitely not something that is conducive, in my opinion, to liking studying, especially from the student's perspective. Not only that, but I actually, excuse me, give me a second. Okay, so anyways, not only that, I would say that the fact that the salaries of teachers, right, are actually dependent on the class average certainly did not help, especially when I was one of those bad students. So as you can imagine how that went, the punishment usually goes anywhere from copying an entire book by hand, within a week or so. And I know that sounds crazy, but I had to do that. And also, if you get something wrong 3 times, they'll publicly shame you. That's what I went through. So basically, go up to the front of the classroom. People will go "Hey, you're the reason why this class is, GPA is class average is so bad." So now moving forward to the Western culture, right, to USA, I was actually surprised by how much, dare I say, relaxation you guys are getting. Right, it's almost like heaven for me. It's first of all, I'm not going to get hit. Second of all, mathematics were a lot easier. So that there's the difference between different cultures and studying. But here's the thing, there is a trade-off. I just want to say, I'm getting to the pedagogy just really quickly in a second. So there is an actual study data that indicates that certain parts of the world where there's students from elementary, right, primary school, even to secondary school, universities, they have much higher academic scores, like SAT, LSAT, or whatever those things are. But they're also, at the same time, they're lower on creativity. And in a lot of Western cultures, especially Scandinavia, but USA is actually pretty much up there, creativity points for students are much higher. And the reason is because the way they are taught, it's not so strict. In fact, some American parents are thinking maybe this is too slacking, right? While in the other part of the world, this is maybe too strict. Now, getting to my high school, I would say my favorite class by far had to be history class. I think it was European or US history, especially European history. And here's something that I haven't heard anybody say this yet, is visual demonstration through actual physical actions. I'm not just talking about drawing some pictures hey, do you guys understand this? But we were learning about how jousting worked in the medieval era. And you could look at, PowerPoints, you could look at the books, but as soon as I asked a question, I forgot his name, but teacher, whatever his last name was, how can we be sure this actually was the way people fought in this particular tournament or in the warfare? And he actually called me up. He said, Peter, come on up. And he brought another person over there, and we had our like yardsticks, right, as like jousting device, improv. And he told us to stand in such a position, and then the other person would actually sit on a really weirdly made chair to demonstrate that it was the horseback, and go like, well, Peter, if you imagine he's charging at you like this, like so, you can't possibly do damage if he moves in this direction. And that made me instantly fell in love with that class, with history, but especially that teacher. And in fact, I loved it so much, I actually decided to teach history for a very short while myself, but more or less about is tutoring actually instead of just teaching. But I still wanted to make my mark in terms of education. And the last thing I will just say is, when it comes to professors, it's really no different. And I'm not saying that every professor has to go that above and beyond, because at a certain point you have to wonder, how much do I fake it till I make it before I am so fake to the point that I'm no longer myself? So there's always a balance. And I kind of been paying attention to YouTube professors, right? As some of you know, probably some prestigious universities that actually have professors making lectures like in MIT, Harvard, Yale, Hopkins, Stanford, Oxford, Cambridge. And there's one man, particularly by the name Robert Sapolsky. Some of you probably heard that name, neuroscientist at Stanford. And when you look at his first lecture in the first of the 25 series on Stanford's official YouTube channel, it's got, I believe by now, it's got 16 million views on it. And it's not because he's necessarily smarter or have more accomplishment than your average scientist, but the way he approaches pedagogy is with humor, with personal connection. And he also sometimes will make even self-deprecating humor. And I think when it comes to a combination of these things, it becomes a very powerful tool for effective pedagogy. And the last thing I will just recommend is his YouTube. It's not a lecture, but it's more like a speaking to an audience about his book called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. You type that into YouTube and you find the full 1 hour, 20-minute YouTube video. You listen to that, you understand why he is one of those more attracting professors.
Wonderful. Peter, if you could put the link in the chat, would appreciate that.
Thank you. Yeah, I will.
Thank you, Peter. Really great observations. I feel for kids who have to go through the first system that you talked about. Next up is going to be Joe and Lyra. Joe.
Yeah, I'll just be very brief. I had professors and even high school teachers. The thing that I found to be the most helpful was not the conversations that I actually had in the classrooms, but the conversations that I would have outside the classrooms. And they would actually spend some time. And that was really, they had so much to share and wanted to share it about their life experiences. And that to me was really what learning is all about. It's kind of that dialogue that you're having with someone else, talking about their life experiences. And so here's one professor who had actually ended up going to Princeton University. And then he said, oh, when I was there was somebody there named John Nash that was walking around the campus. And I was like, Dr. Lee, I know who that is. And we started to talk for hours about that. And these are all during office hours. This is not going to be a lecture during the class itself. So I think that this is something where, the real learning becomes when it becomes a dialogue. And that's kind of what we do here. I think that's really the beauty, because you're going to learn something in the classroom, but it's really what's outside the classroom is where you really get a lot of learning. The second thing is that I did notice there was one person that had left that is really was passionate about learning. And I think that that's key for a teacher. And I didn't know she was a teacher at the time, but she is also like kind of a lifelong learner. And also she had just told me that, yeah, my previous job had been in communications. So 1, she was passionate about learning. 2, she was a lifelong learner. And 3, she was good about communication. And when you have that kind of combination, that's really critical for a teacher, because 1, they're able not only to connect with the students because the students see that they're authentically interested in teaching them, but they're able to connect with people. And so that was actually quite remarkable. The third person is, there's another person that actually has used innovative techniques like artificial intelligence. And, as a way of actually, and I'm talking about with Carnegie Mellon back in the day, at an early, early point, like probably in the 70s. And I think that that's actually another important part about teaching, is coming up with trying to think about ways outside of the routine ways of actually educating everyone. I mean, we can all follow the script, but when you start saying, okay, how can I reach students in a different way? And in a way, that's how we spoke to that a little bit when we talked about humor or even irreverence. Those are kind of different approaches from a personality perspective, but there's also the fundamental approach about how you're actually doing it to begin with. So I think all 3 of those areas, if you were to say, 1, individuals that are willing to share their experiences, taking advantage of their willingness to share their expertise outside the classroom. 2 is an individual that's passionate and is able to communicate, and that's a lifelong learner. And 3 is the type of individual that's going to think about how to educate people from using new tools. And so, and I'll use my final one for the Russell Ackwell story is still the best one of all. He makes the student teachers, and that's essentially, I think, one of the most innovative ways to actually teach children. So anyway, I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Joel. Great points. Peter has put the link to the Sapolsky video in the chat. I'm a big fan of Sapolsky. His favorite statement I have, which I use all the time, is strong opinions weakly held. It's a really, really powerful idea. Next up is going to be Lyra, followed by Dawn. Lyra.
Hello, everyone. This is my first time with the group. And when I think back to the teachers that I valued the most, I have to agree with what most of you have said about teaching practical lessons and being passionate. And I love the person that talked about being a storyteller. I'm a college professor, and I'm consistently looking for ways to inspire my students. And sometimes I just feel like I'm at a loss. And especially after remote learning, I feel that students have lost their motivation. They come into the classroom, they just want the grade. And I try to instill a passion in them. I try to get them to teach each other, but I find a resistance, and my classes are anywhere from 250 to 400 students. So it's hard to garner enthusiasm in a class that large, but I try. And I try to use innovative technology, and I try to get them excited, but I feel like they're not as excited as I was when I was a student, and I'm still trying to reach that point. I show Sapolsky. I love Sapolsky, and I want to teach like Sapolsky, and I want to be able to tell stories because I feel that's more engaging. And I'm just trying to work on that aspect. And because I tell my students, I don't want you to memorize anything, because once they graduate, they won't have to. They can use generative AI, but they have to learn critical thinking. And I think that might be where the block is. Sometimes they don't they just don't want to engage in that. And I'm still trying to work on ways to get them to do that. So that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you. Thank you, Lyra. Really appreciate that. Next up is going to be Dawn, followed by Laura. Dawn.
Hello.
Hey, please go on.
Long ago, I was helping someone teaching a financial seminar for adults who wants to invest money or learn how to invest money. Very basic, life insurance, stocks, bonds, that kind of thing. It was taught by my boss, a financial advisor. There's this phrase everybody probably know is the phrase, the teacher will appear when the student is ready. So at the end of every seminar session, and each one runs about 3-4 weeks, once a week. At the end of each class, he would say, to teach is to learn again. And he said it every night. I was there every night to help him with that. It got kind of boring after a while. And then years later, probably 15 years later, I volunteered to teach Vietnamese. I've been in the country by that time, 20 years from Vietnam. So I grew up knowing Vietnamese, of course, but most of my life, most of the time here, I never use it, barely, because I'm surrounded by English speakers, mostly Americans. When I chose to volunteer to teach Vietnamese, I had to learn everything again so I can teach. So the phrase, the teacher will appear when the student is ready, is that when it wasn't until I start teaching myself that I realized what that means is when I'm teaching Vietnamese, I'm learning Vietnamese again because I had forgotten it. And that phrase, to teach is to learn again, it didn't make sense to me, meaning the teaching didn't appear to me until I was ready when I was teaching myself. So ever since then, it's not just the teaching, but the sharing as well. When we share knowledge like this, in this case, we learn new things again, things that we probably learned a long time ago and have forgotten. So that's my, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dawn. Next up is Laura, followed by Danielle. Laura. Let's see, Laura, can you unmute? Okay, let's do one thing. Let's go to Danielle. Whenever Laura unmutes, we'll go ahead and put her in the queue. Next up is Danielle. Danielle, go ahead.
Hi, sorry, it took me a minute to unmute there. I've loved so many things you've all been sharing. So a lot of what I say, I think will echo some of that. There's a teacher I had in kind of both the end of grade school and the beginning of high school. So I had her, I don't know how many years, but she was an English teacher and we had drama with her as well. And what I've been thinking about this actually over the last few years about who the teachers that really touched my life have been. And there've been several, but she kind of really encapsulates so many of the qualities that have really stayed with me, I think. And she was always very authentic and passionate with how she approached things. Like you could tell she really loved what she was teaching. And there somehow in that, it really felt like we were in on it with her. and that there was a kind of just natural intimacy and respect where, you know, she was sharing what she held to be really special. And like some of you have said, that was kind of a window into her world. And she, you know, she tended to share things in that kind of multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary way. And that's one of the things I've been thinking about a lot, that just how some people manage to bring together many threads, and you know, they're really connecting it with their lives. But along the way, I think there is that when you're shifting between inductive and deductive, and creative, constructive, and deconstructive, which between English and drama we were doing, because we were reading, then discussing, and then writing and acting things out. So we were playing with things from many different angles, and we were encouraged to recognize our humanity and bring our humanity. And also significantly, we sat in a circle. And that was really nice, because we were really seeing each other as we looked at these characters. We're seeing ourselves in each other, seeing ourselves in the characters. And I think it also set up a really egalitarian atmosphere, which I think in terms of creating critical thinkers is a really positive thing. Like just off the bat, like we're in this together. You're the next generation. I have knowledge that you don't have, but you have enthusiasm, and you're going to see things in new ways. When I've been asked to lead anything or teach, I love to kind of jump in and find a way to bring that in, because I think that that's incredibly valuable. And so I have a great love for her, as several of my teachers, and also I'll just add experiential exercises, and like I think, was it Peter? I don't know who is saying it, but just that approaching things in different ways, being physical with it, like getting yourself processing things differently. I think that's just so infinitely powerful, and even helps people engage with their own, whatever level of synesthetic sense and learning they have. Because I think bringing physics into dance, bringing just everything you can is just really powerful for how we set up our brains. So that's
fantastic observations. Thank you, Daniel. Appreciate it. Laura, glad to
Okay,
see you
unmuted.
what are some of your favorite teachers, and what did you get from them?
Well, I want to, my favorite, okay, I have to start it from, I was an undergraduate math major at City College. And when I graduated, they hired me in the fall to start teaching remedial math. I didn't have a clue what it meant. So I went to my favorite professor and I said, what do I do? And he said, think about the teachers that, had the most impact on you, and take everything from each of them and make yourself a teacher. Great, I'll do that. And he said, just make sure you take your eraser with you, because otherwise it'll be stolen. So that was a great piece of advice. And I moved into the classroom. Now you have to understand, I was working with a marginalized group of students out of Philadelphia who came from shitty high schools and probably were passed through. They failed the placement exam. I was in the remedial math office. I was placing them into these classes. A white woman, a couple of years older than them, looking at me like, this is your fault, I'm doing this. And they were angry with me. And then I wound up being their teacher on top of it. So it was not a great setting to begin with. But what I realized was I had to prove to them that I believed in them, and I told them straight up, I'm really sorry you had a shitty high school experience and that you didn't learn much. And we just have to start new. And I said, this class is going to be different, and in many ways. So I figured the best thing I could do was help them develop trust in me, and to provide support to prove to them that I was going to help them. I gave homework every night and I graded all the problems, maybe 30 problems that I gave them every night. I wrote commentary. I invited them to my office if I didn't understand things. I gave office hours 5 days a week, anytime they needed help. So I created an ambience that they began to trust me, that I believed in them, and help them to, begin to gain a little bit of confidence in themselves. And so the next step is, why didn't they learn? I mean, I know why I didn't learn, but maybe I did, maybe I didn't, but I was confused and I didn't understand what happened and what was the failure in the learning process. And so I had to figure out how I was going to overcome that. Do I give detailed solutions, and go over things in detail? So slowly, how do I evolve myself as a teacher to make myself the best possible guide, to them, so that they can see themselves as learners, trust themselves as learners, and want to be learners. And that's what I had to do over the next 20 years. I spent that experience. And part of it was getting involved with AI software from Carnegie Mellon, to develop a whole new way of learning, thinking, which was fundamentally teach kids how to think, and that was my greatest awakening, was that our failure is that we don't teach students how to think. We give them material and say, answer this question, but we've never taught them how to think. So that changed, that was my life-changing thing. And that was pretty much, if we develop metacognitive strategies, teach them explicitly and help them to develop that language internally every time they approach a problem, will that improve their, and yes, it did. My students who had that did better on the skill and drill final exam than the kids who did skill and drill, because I never taught skill and drill in my class, and my students outperformed them without doing skill and drill. And it's been, I mean, it's still something that irks me every day of my life, that we are failing and we will continue to fail until we start to approach it differently. And we still don't approach it differently. I mean, I think we should have, like Guggenheim, structures, and we put, projects all up into, and let the kids roll, and just do what they can do and learn as they can and ask for help when they, but we have to give them the freedom to go through that learning process, have them develop that kind of thinking and guide them to, but we still don't do that. And we throw money away and we continue. And how is this ever going to end? And it's not just math, it's every subject, and I'm still befuddled by it. And
Thank you. Thank you. Laura, you are inspiring. You're inspiring. Thank you. Thank you so much. I wish I had, I had teachers like you for everything. The level of commitment, everything. So just amazing. Thank you so much. So last up is going to be Sophia. Sophia, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to share experience that I had with great teachers, I can say, and something that I have seen.
Sophia, there is a problem with your audio. It's very, very scratchy.
What about now?
Yeah, it is better.
It is better. Okay. So one thing that is very important, I think, is the ability of teacher to.
Sophia, the sound is very bad. You can say it in short, or you can fix the sound and come back, whatever you prefer.
I think I will come back. Let me fix it. And thank you.
Sounds good. Okay. All right, folks. So, Mike, if you let me go ahead and give, what stood out to me. It was just an amazing set of things. Is it okay if I just?
Oh, yeah, actually, that's what I wanted you to do. Absolutely.
Thank you. Okay, so this was just incredible. This was just incredible. We had Mona talk about the importance of teacher being authentic and who they are. And then we had Dawn talk about letting the students be who they are and grow in their own way. Then we had Alicia, who talked about teachers opening their lives, opening their eyes to the wider life which is out there and inspiring them. Then Mike talked about teachers that give you the context so they know where you're starting, and then break everything down so the teacher guides them step by step. Then you had Peter talked about focusing on creativity instead of scores, and then talked about the value of actually taking these abstract ideas and making them concrete so they can see what these ideas actually mean. Then you had Joe, who talked about the openness, open-heartedness of teachers who want to share with students and not separate it out from, okay, now my class is done, now go away. And he also talked about the value of lifelong learners. Lyra talked about the crucial importance of motivating students, because if the teacher cannot produce that, nothing actually is going to happen. Don talked about the principle that teacher will appear when the student is ready. Danielle talked about, giving the feeling that the students are in on it with the teacher, on whatever the teacher is doing, and the power of multidisciplinary learning and the structure of a circle where everybody is considered as an equal human being instead of a hierarchy. And then Laura, to top it all off, talked about the importance of believing in your students, having the commitment to do whatever work is needed, and actually thinking out what is needed, why, what is needed for teaching, which is really how to think and convert it in a program and actually transmit it. I mean, this is just an amazing, amazing set of observations. I'm just completely blown away. Mike, what would you like to do next?
I think if people would like, they can do something similar to what you just did in terms of, because I pulled away so much of what you just said, right? I have a couple of others. There's one thing in particular that I walked away with, but I don't want to say it first. So I was wondering if, I
have another proposal.
Go ahead.
I want to talk about the kind of learning that we do here.
Yeah.
What can we learn from all the observations that we have had about teaching and learning through the experience people have had, and how can we apply it to learning in this context? Because we are doing this every day. So let me introduce it by, just talking about my reaction, okay? And this is going to be very stupid because I was saying, wait a minute, I actually do not think in terms of teaching a teacher and student anymore, okay? I really don't. Because the way what has happened is that for me, it's like you're really trying to learn from life, from all of life, all the time. And it's not like, okay, I'm now in a classroom. There is no classroom. There is just life. And you are in it all the time. And potentially everybody is your teacher. Okay, so if you're actually listening to people, if you're actually seeing where are they coming from, no matter what level of knowledge they have, no matter what area of knowledge they have, if you're actually listening to them, actually people have a lot to teach you because human potential is so large. And whatever each of us have achieved is so little that there is so much more to go. And each of us is different. We have our own gifts, own strengths, own backgrounds, and we have gone along multiple dimensions. And so if you look at people saying, I mean, the whole idea of 52 living ideas, when I started the meetups here in person, I used to call it joint exploration of the wood. It's like I'm exploring the world, and I'm exploring not for the sake of the classroom, but that's because I am completely enthralled by the world and want to know everything about it. People, both outside, both the physical world, the human world, the social world, the psychological world inside me, all of it, and trying to explore it. And here are these other people trying to do that as best as they can. And then, who is the teacher and who is the student? Everybody is a student and everybody is a teacher. And it doesn't really matter. Actually, I like to do meetups where I don't know anything. Like, again, I think I'm confusing a lot of things about teaching and learning when I'm speaking right now. Okay, because there could be different contexts. I'm talking about a particular context. This is just my context. This is a full adult context where you're already committed to full, you're already thrilled about the prospect of learning. You're committed to lifelong learning, and you're talking to other lifelong learners about it. So that is the context in which that's how I think about that. It is not like teachers and students. You're both teachers and student, and you can actually be a student only by being a teacher, and you can only be a student by, and vice versa. You can be a teacher by being a student, and you can be a student only by being a teacher, because it is a conversation. It is a conversation with reality. If you're doing something, you understand something and you do it, like jousting, you do it, and you use that as a feedback in order to learn. Similarly, if you understand something, you speak about it and you take it in from other people, get and correct yourself. So student and teacher is actually just breathing in and breathing out. And why would you separate breathing in and breathing out? You can simply call it breathing, and it works very well. And fully realizing that there are these two components that go. So that's my thoughts on teaching and learning. So if you have any thoughts about teaching and learning in this context, okay, here almost everybody here is committed to lifelong learning. Okay, everybody is committed to that, so you can take that for granted. And please talk about what you think about learning and teaching in this context. Go ahead and type an exclamation mark. Let's start with Alison, followed by Mona. Alison.
So like when I was a kid, you generally would sit in class and the teacher would speak and then they would call on you, and that's kind of how it worked. And then there's been a big shift to cooperative learning where, and I'll be honest, I've like fought against cooperative learning. I really hated it because the kids are in desks. They're like all their desks face each other, and half of the room has their back to the teacher. And this has driven me nuts for years. And I kept saying, I want them in rows, I want them in rows. But actually doing 52 living ideas is the thing that finally got me to understand cooperative learning. And it finally was like, oh, we really do learn from each other. So, and it's kind of interesting because it changed how I do it. I do a lot more things with cooperative learning now. And one of the things that is always kind of interesting to me is like figuring out who to place in which groups. And it always takes a while at the beginning of the year because I'm trying to sort out the kids. But, I always try and make sure that any kids, and I even tell the kids at the end of the year, I tell them that they have certain kids are like strategically placed around at each table because they're like my teacher's assistants, so that they're the kids who I know are going to be really good at explaining it. And then the ones who have trouble always have somebody nearby that they can ask. But it's always a hard thing because sometimes some kids get really like power hungry. They're little Napoleons and they want to order everybody around, and then they fight against it, and it's like this battle. But anyway, I should tell you that you have turned my whole thinking around about it. And now I do try to move this into the little kid world.
Alison, I wanted to tell you one secret. You were saying, you came here and you see, oh, so many, everybody knows so much. There is a secret I have. I just do meetups on things, and people who know about things and are deeply interested in it show up, including people who want to learn. So automatically, it's without doing anything, I get teachers and students in one place. And so it always appears that everybody knows more than you, which is great, which is exactly where we want to be. Thank you.
Well, I did realize after a while that some of these people know a whole lot about that one subject, but they don't know anything about whatever's happening 2 days later.
Exactly. So
I realized they're not actually, brilliant about everything.
and they all have the same reaction as you. They'll say, wait a minute, all these people know so much more than me.
Yeah.
Everybody has that, and which is great, which is the power of cooperative learning, because all of us know some things that other people don't. Thank you so much, Alison. Next up is Mona, Joe, Mike, and Don. Would love to hear from you. Mona.
Thank you, Shrikant. I really appreciate what you said about showing up and with this mindset that you don't know, like you don't know actually what the lesson is, like what is actually being taught or learned at the moment. And I wanted to give you an example. You might find this funny. It was during the pandemic when we were switching over to online learning, and I was asked by my chairman to make a video tutorial for the rest of the faculty on how to conduct online teaching from my iPad or from whatever device I had. And I thought that's what I was doing. I was going to make a video, I was going to make a recording, and I was going to show everyone how to use the iPad. And little did I know that as soon as I started the video, things started to go wrong. And everything like I was counting on was kind of falling apart. And I kind of had to make a quick decision at that point. It's like, what do? Do I start off all over again and record again from scratch? Or do I keep going? And I decided, you know what? I'm going to just leave it like that. That was like a snap judgment I made. And I'm going to just keep talking about the failures. And then I did the rest of the video about how to handle all the stuff that can go wrong, like everything will go wrong. And what do you do? And I kept my grace under pressure, and I showed them that. And then I realized that was the need of the moment, that the people didn't need to know how to use the iPad. They were freaking out because they thought everything will go wrong. And they needed reassurance that if anything goes wrong, they're going to be all right. And I showed them just that, but I didn't know ahead of time that that's what was needed. It's just what happened. So I trust the dynamic of the group. I trust the dynamic of the process. That's what I wanted to say in conclusion.
Wow, Mona, that's a great example. So just like Don was saying that when the student is ready, teacher will appear. This is an example of you are there as a teacher and you teach whatever is needed to be taught. At this point, it turned out initially your plan was to teach about this, but then you ended up teaching about something which was actually far, far more valuable. And that approach of saying, actually listen to the students, see what they're asking, instead of talking at them with a preconceived idea, you try to listen to them and see what is needed. Beautiful, thank you. Next up is going to be Mike. Mike, go ahead.
So in terms of this context, Shrikant, I'm not sure everybody in attendance tonight realizes what they've done. So this is my 52 Living Ideas, my first 52 Living Ideas notebook. And this is filled from start to finish. So in front of me tonight, I sort of did what you did, Shrikant. Just came up with a topic, and then I just chatted with Alison and sat back. But what you've actually done tonight, I have 2 pages. I have, 7, 8, 9, 10 little kind of notes that I wrote down. So in this context, you can go online and buy hundreds and hundreds of books that say the 10 best ways to do this or the 15 best ways to do that. Well, you've all done that tonight in terms of the teaching experience. So I think to get the most out of this particular context, it's important, number one, to stay engaged and really listen to what people say, and then write down the things that they said, like write them down. And occasionally there's going to be something that really makes you stop and think. And you can't stop there. To do it right, you have to revisit the next day. Because if I go from this meetup to another one, or I'm reading a book, I'm actually reading Oliver Twist right now. And I'm reading all different things these days. If I go from this meetup right to Oliver Twist, I'm going to miss something, because my head needs to revisit some of the things that all of you said tonight. I learned about storytelling. I learned about tinkering. Don and somebody else, so Don was talking about tinkering on the computer, and all the greats, whether they're musicians, they're tinkering when they're not performing what they're supposed to perform. I don't want to begin to repeat everything that you all said, but I commend you all, because again, in this particular context, which is our point, you have written a little manual about this process. So I'm quite thankful. It's been quite an experience.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Mike. And please keep it coming. It's not done yet. So please, folks, keep it coming. John, what do you think about this style of learning?
So I think the best place to start is, I think we all have to kind of get ready for how AI is going to change a lot of things. It's going to make this, what's happening now, having actual conversations, much more important. I think we're going to start to realize that, and maybe we're going to start to be able to direct some more headspace towards that. I feel like as a teacher this year in February or whatever, when I started to play around with ChatGPT, I felt like I was given a gift as a teacher. I still don't know if we're going to end up going towards AI apocalypse and robots and all that stuff. But forget about that for now. As a teacher, it's a gift, because I have the ability to now kind of model that idea of I don't know kind of what to do. And I tried that out, and it was so much better than going to a Wikipedia article, or because I was actually able to chat with it. And I have tried this out on my phone using a shortcut, and I'll be driving, or I'll just be lying around, and I'll be able to have a conversation about a home improvement project I'm doing in my house. And I'm getting that information immediately. And the thing is, that's not the be all end all. I'm going to have to talk to an expert, because I'm not letting ChatGPT be the one who decides how my house is, remodeled. But there's a lot of stuff, the easy stuff, I can get it out of the way. I can ask the stupid questions. I can know that there's a baseline, and I know that my students can also know that there's a baseline of understanding that they can get. And now, how do they weave it together? How do they become critical thinkers? That's the fun part of teaching. And I have an opportunity to do more of that now, because quite frankly, if I'm really not doing my job, because we have to start to accept kind of how this is going to start to change the way people are learning. And yeah, it's a crazy topic that I'm attacking on so many different levels, but I feel right now that it puts me in a position of really appreciating opportunities like this, to be able to have conversations, to be able to reach out, and then to be able to then make me have those realizations about where I am, because I don't think I get there otherwise. Just kind of get stuck in the middle of it. Being able to take a step back, metacognate about it, it's super useful.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Don. This gave me an opportunity to talk about something that I forgot to talk about, because I listed what everybody said, and there was a summary to it. There is it's like, what is the theme that runs through everything that everybody said? Okay, it's very simple. Really, you're teaching yourself. You're basically being a human being. Really, you're teaching how to be human. okay, how to be human. And it is such a rich topic that doing that authentically, the other people, everything else, all the information you transmit, everything pales in comparison. Just listen to the leitmotif of everything everybody said. They've said, oh, that is a wonderful person. I would like to be like that. And then everything else is just details. And that is exactly the thing that AI cannot deliver. AI can give you information. It does not have a character. It doesn't have a human character. A human being has something within them which is precious, which is very, very different. Everything else is material that you can use. And I love AI as a means, but end is always human. Next up is going to be Laura. Laura, what do you think about this format of learning?
I love it. And can I just tell a little anecdotal story, which is funny?
Sure.
At the end, I developed a course, and I called it Quantitative Literacy Through Algebra. The book was about 3/4 of an inch thick, mind you. And so these kids had a book that nobody knew they were in Algebra 1. It gave them a whole sense of dignity that they've never had before. And there were designated classrooms for math. And this old faculty member was walking past my room one day and he heard all this noise and he couldn't figure out what was going on in this. It couldn't be a math class with all this noise. It must be history, had to be a debate. Well, it was my class, my kids who the first day said, groups, I don't know what to do. And I could have been down the block and out of the building anywhere. They didn't need me at a certain point. They were talking in their groups and their voices were up and down and all over the place. And I thought that was like, I showed you guys, I proved to you that these kids had worth and they had ability and you just didn't ever want to open your mind to it. But I've proven to you that it was okay to give them the calculus lab to do their work and, they weren't going to dirty the keys or do anything. And I gave it to them up and down and right and left. And it was one of those wonderful days in life that.
Thank you. Thank you, Laura.
Yeah.
Next up is going to be Joe, followed by Daniel. Joe.
What you just said actually really reminded me of, something that CJ was always talking about with Buckminster Fuller's universe. That it was the universe is an aggregate of all humanity's consciously apprehended and communicated experience. And in a way, that's what it is. It's our experiences. And that is something that AI does not have. Like, it doesn't have an experience. It can convey information, but it doesn't necessarily go through, doesn't have the human experience. But I think one of the things that makes this special is that everybody's here to learn and that there is a mutual respect. We're all at different places. There are some people that come here that, let's be honest, Yasuhiko is a very good thinker. Okay, but he responds to everybody the same way, and really trying to if you ask him a question or things like that, and that is that's beneficial for everybody. It's beneficial because he's thinking about how to communicate an idea, and we're getting the benefit of somebody that's that highly skilled. So that is very rare. And that is what is authentic kind of learning, I think, in a way, for me. And just as I said with the teachers that you speak to after class, that's what we're doing here in a way. You have these relationships that are built, and it's not just about the topic. It's about learning in general. And then what happens is, more importantly, is we're able to start to make connections between different disciplines, and you start to see things a little bit differently. And that's what's really mind-opening, is that when you start to see connections between the Tao, Bhagavad Gita, Gospel of John, when you see those connections between those three, it's a very important experience to have, because then you understand the depth of what they were actually trying to answer the problems, or even what the text is saying. So I think that you engage with text on a different level in that regard. And then it's also hearing somebody else's perspective. We have so many different voices and different, people from all kinds of walks of life. I mean, as much as I don't care for Zoom, it still brings a lot of people together, and that is a tremendous benefit. So for me, there's a multitude of things. It's kind of like almost in a way like you have Krishna and Arjuna having a conversation, and they're learning, and that's it's almost just like that environment to a certain degree. So that's what that's what I love about this. And we have also people, I still remember Chase's father teaching calculus. I mean, so it's like, it's not just one thing. And then we were going over Jung, all these ideas. So it's not, that's the other beauty thing. We can come here and get expertise in any area, depending on the day.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Joel. Next up is Danielle. Danielle, go ahead.
Hi, yeah. So this is really, I think, dovetailing on a couple of things that were just said, in terms of I share that kind of sense of inspiration participating in this kind of discussion, and that egalitarian quality that's here. I really appreciate that. And I've felt that with what's happening first with the internet, now with AI, that more and more, everything's kind of this, there's the network, but we're all kind of sensing more and more connections between things far flung apart. And so there's the potential for all this kind of new, for us to each in our own ways, from our own perspective, from our unique spot in the universe, to see possibilities of new paradigms. And that brings me to, because I think that a wonderful part of what's been happening and what's happening here is more and more people sharing their questions. And I find myself wondering, I don't know if people do this a lot, but I've been wondering if people open topics where there's actually the question session at the beginning, where people share kind of like how they are in the dark, what they think something might be, and just a maybe significant sharing on that kind of thing, and what areas of curiosity they have, and what that might do in a context like this. So I'm curious if you do that kind of thing, and if anybody's had experience with kind of guiding things with that at the start much.
Sure. I'll give you an example, but what we try to do here, Danielle, is to create like a critical mass of questions. And we try to kind of create that mass upfront, so that when we come here, there is a large number of people already committed to exploring that question. So there is, they've thought about those questions, and they have come here with their ways of approaching it. They talk to each other. Just to give you an example, 2 weeks ago, a young architect from UK wrote to me just by email, out of the blue, saying that I watched all 37 of your Louis Sullivan videos, and just blew me away. It has transformed my life. But there is this other architect who has also had a similar impact on my life, Christopher Alexander. Can you please do a meetup series on that? Okay. Now, I did not know much about Christopher Alexander, except the fact that my friend Yasuhiko, who is an amazing, amazing philosopher who has done several meetups here, recommended him highly to me about 2 years ago. Okay, and I remember that. So I said to Sam, this gentleman from England, that, oh, you want to do this? I'm open to starting a series. Go ahead and do a introductory series of why you should study Christopher Alexander. Can you do that? So he said, sure, I'll do that. So he shows up, you know, I came up with a special time because he's in UK, so it was at 1 p.m. And he started doing the presentation, and Yasuhiko shows up. Okay, now Yasuhiko knows Christopher Alexander amazingly well. He's been steeped in that for like 3 decades, okay? So suddenly we have a conversation between Sam, who is the presenter, who kind of knows both of them reasonably well, Christopher Alexander and Louis Sullivan's work. I know Louis Sullivan a lot. I've spent like 2 or 3 decades with it. Yasuhiko knows Christopher Alexander, and Sam knows both of them, okay? But he's not had that much time with each of them. So we had a 3-way conversation and then a whole bunch of questions. So that's the kind of thing that I like to build. So we kind of come up with questions. So for example, Evanique told me that, oh, I want to do something on Mary, Mother Mary, and the place of Mother Mary in the divine feminine and the Bible. And we came up with a list of questions. So tomorrow we're going to have this bunch of questions. So the questions are there up front so people can think about it beforehand. And people who are interested in those questions come in and they do that. Occasionally we will do something, on the fly, but I think you're right. Maybe we should do more of those. So thank you very much, Daniel. I appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you.
Next up is Andrea, followed by Alison. Andrea.
Okay, sorry, because it's hard to unmute. Thank you. I just want to briefly comment on your question regarding this space. I find that is interesting because it provides an alternative space that we cannot really find at the universities or colleges, right? If these spaces, for example, that open up from Meetup that started in person, and then because of the pandemic, most of the meetings start being online, it opened borders, all right? Because more and more people from different parts of the world can join, and I find it fascinating. And I've been thinking about this, all right? How Meetup, especially your, I would say your channel, all right? 52 Living Ideas is very interesting because it is a very alternative space that wouldn't, wouldn't find opportunities inside the university, for example, because of so many constraints that university or colleges put it, right? Here we come, as Joseph said, that we have here respect to each other. We come from different backgrounds. So when you are in a college setting, for example, usually you have to follow certain ideologies. You have to be careful with what you're saying. And it seems that you have to belong to a certain group, right? And apparently here we come from different backgrounds, but still, and with different ideas we all have, but keeping the respect and dignity that's important. So this is something that it draws me to this space whenever I can. So thank you very much for it.
Thank you, Andrea. I think you put your finger on it, because what happens is that most learning spaces are structured and they are hierarchical, and they are all kind of siloed from each other. And the people who are in there are kind of uniform within it, same age, same background, same locality, right? Here, what we have is that it is an open space, people from with all ages, all backgrounds, all geography coming in. It is a flat structure. So the way we do it, the presenter puts something on the table for people to think about, and then everybody can contribute. And everybody listens to what everybody is saying. and then we can have conversations about it. So it is, you know, I find that this is far more effective way of learning, because what we find is that even a person who doesn't know something, like for example, we are doing meetups in the Bible. Now, I don't know much about the Bible. You know, I did not grow up here, so I did not know much about it. But I was able to learn, I'm able to learn so much every day because I'm speaking out. If I'm reading, I'm speaking out, I'm listening to what other people are saying. And it's just incredible. And if I were to try to do that in a more structured environment, like a Bible school, for example, I would be limited to a particular kind of view of it. And the people around would be kind of uniform. Whereas here it is much more open. And that's what all subjects deserve, you know, kind of this open exploration of the subject from every possible, you know, perspective, multiple perspective. And other thing that you hit on is it's about the dignity of individuals. You know, everybody can speak their mind. And we have some very simple rules. You know, you keep on topic, you raise your hand when you speak so you don't interrupt other people. You be brief, so many people can, you can hear other people instead of just hearing yourself. And feel free to disagree with anybody on anything, but be courteous in doing so. So I think you got it. Thank you. Next up is Alison.
Yeah, I think the problem with college is that you're too young to really get a lot out of it sometimes, you know.
Education is wasted on the young.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, sometimes it's a shame. You're reading all these really phenomenally deep books about life, and you've just barely started to live your life. And, you know, some colleges draw locally and some colleges are quite international. But at the end of the day, you're all 20 years old and, you know, there's only so much experience you have. And one of the things that's so great, I mean, there are some younger people here, but generally most people are like, I would say 40 and up, and would come from such an incredibly wide range of backgrounds and life experiences. And when they're bringing all of that to all these different books that we're studying and ideas we're learning about, it just, you know, it's just such a phenomenal experience, I think. Yeah.
Wonderful. Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm so sorry I have to leave. I have to help my goddaughter with a lab project that's due tomorrow. But I just wanted to thank you all again for coming out and spending the evening with us. If you took notes, I highly encourage that you review them within the next day or two and think about some of the questions you put on the table. I can't thank you enough. I always feel like I'm going to college for free here. So thank you very much.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I hope you had a good time. Allison, thank you very much. It was great talking to you.
Thanks. It was great talking to you.
Yeah, and Alicia, thanks for coming out. Really appreciate it, everybody. I got to run.
Excellent. All right, folks. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
See you next time. Bye.
Bye-bye.